Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining. We'll be starting off very soon. Dom's off sick today, so he's in the background listening, but he's probably not going to be speaking much. So what I'll do is we've got an amazing cast of speakers today. And sorry about the grey background, but this is anything but grey. So today we're going to be talking about the future of AI in the NHS. And hopefully we can paint a big picture about what we're expecting in the future. And I can see a lot of the attendees are people that are working in the NHS or innovating within the NHS. So we wanted to be an interactive session. So we want to hear from you as well. What I'll do is I'll put some of the, where's the chat? I'll put on the chat some of the questions. Oh, I don't think I have this function. But we've got 4 key questions, which I will paste in the chat now. We'll run through these questions. We'll hear from the panel. And then in the second half, we'll open it up for a question and answering. So hopefully it'll be more interactive. So without further ado, if the speakers don't mind turning on the cameras and the mics, and maybe just do a quick round of introductions. I'll start with myself. So for those who don't know me, my name's Joshua L. Young. I am the clinical lead of Tortus. I'm also a training neurologist and an AI researcher. So I'm leading in Tortus on all things clinical and AI related. That includes clinical alignment, safety, research, really the frontiers of how we use large language models effectively in healthcare. I will hand over to Ikanjali to introduce herself.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ikanjali. I am a physician by background and now work in digital transformation for HCA Healthcare UK in medicine and oncology.
And Daria?
Hi, everyone. I'm Daria. I'm a software engineer by background, but now spend most of my time investing in healthcare companies at Speed Invest. For those of you who don't know us, we are an early-stage venture capital fund backing technologies that are reshaping industries such as healthcare. We've been around for 15 years now and have a couple of offices across Europe. So I'm based in London, but we also have a presence in France, Germany, and Austria. And excited about the conversation.
Thank you, Daria. I always love speaking to engineers who made the transition to healthcare. I think it's a super interesting space to be in. And Keith, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hello everyone. My name is Keith Grimes. I'm a former general practitioner. I'm a digital health consultant and founder of Curistica, which is a clinical product innovation consultancy. What I do these days is bring together the clinical, the product, the technical, the compliance, and all of those things and help companies build safe, effective, equitable, and sustainable health tech products that actually improve patient outcomes. And as is the way of the world, a lot of that is in AI.
Perfect. Okay, so look, let's kick off the first question, which may be slightly loaded, slightly interesting. The question is, will patients be seeing an AI or a human first in 10 years' time in the NHS? And maybe I can just start off, this immediately generates a lot of images in my head. Some very optimistic ideas. We've all seen the power of AI and large language models in clinical triaging and patient conversation, history taking, medical diagnoses. Like there's so many places in the workflow it can fit in. So it's a very optimistic idea. But why don't I start with Ikanjali? And then we can work the same way as the introductions. But where do you think the future is in 10 years? Will patients be seeing an AI first or a human first?
That's a great question. I think we have to consider which patients are we talking about and in what setting. It's undeniable at this stage that a number of patients, a large proportion of patients will be interacting with AI, perhaps on their initial visit. But there still will be that cohort of patients that will want to see a human, will need to see a human. And I think in 10 years' time, that may well still be the case. We'll still have a population that will be digitally naive or resistant. But I think the population around the growth of AI and who will be interacting with it will certainly be increasing.
Yeah, I mean, I can go next. I guess no, fully agree. I mean, I think the human aspect in healthcare is very important, and it's here to stay. I don't think AI will replace clinicians, and we will just be talking with a computer from now on, or in 10 years from now. But what I think is that it will completely reshape the pathways. It will make clinicians much more productive and allow them to focus on what matters most, so the human interaction. It depends a lot on which pathways we are talking about. So thinking about primary care, yes, I think most likely we will be talking with an AI first who will help us, to do the triaging and initial diagnostic and actually assess, what's the urgency for that case. But I don't think it will completely replace the clinicians.
Yeah. And I look forward 10 years, and I'm hoping that healthcare will feel much more human. It doesn't feel very human just now. But the other thing to say is that I think talking about AI as anything separate will be completely gone by this point. I mean, AI is going to be like fire, water, electricity, the internet. It's going to be redundant to talk about it separately. So I think AI will be involved in absolutely every single touch point. We already have a healthcare system where a lot of people don't see a human first anyway, and I think that's going to continue. But the trouble is that a lot of our time is spent doing machine-like things in any case. So my hope is that AI will at least free us up and allow us to lean into that human-to-human contact as well. I'm sure there will be some avatar-based stuff and advanced chatbots and so on providing the care, but all towards the end of having care provided by humans.
Yeah, no, Keith, I think a lot about seeing humans that are assisted by AI. Like almost like a symbiotic relationship. What we've been doing with Tortus with AI scribes is that we can free up the clinician to focus on the patient and take the history and keep that doctor-patient relationship, but hopefully reduce the time to document and free up doctors to do what they actually love, which is seeing patients. I don't know if you guys had any thoughts about how we can work with AI in a positive way, and maybe I can open it up to the three of you.
I'd love to start with that, Josh. Yeah, it's a great question. I think retaining or remembering and keeping the patients at the heart of the journey, right? It is ultimately care that we are providing. Care is a human experience. It can be simulated by machines, and in fact, they're often very effective in simulating care. But we are fundamentally providing a very human experience when we are caring for patients. So remembering and keeping patients at the heart of the journey, and also the problem that they've come with, or the problem in the healthcare system at the heart of how the tech is being deployed, I think is really fundamental in how we implement AI solutions.
And it's a journey, right? There's also a huge trust element involved in it. Like if you think about, maybe 2 years ago, if you were telling me that scribes will be so widely adopted, then maybe I would have been a bit skeptical. But now it's starting to be a bit more of a given. At least that's what we're seeing in the US, and it will come to Europe as well. So it takes time. It takes a bit of time to build that trust.
What do you look for, Daria? So you're in Speed Invest, and you invest in different health tech companies, right? Like, do you ever look for technology that assists clinicians, or do you look for things that are more autonomous? Like I know Skin Analytics recently become autonomous in screening for skin cancer in the NHS. Like, do you look at it that way, like autonomous or assistive AI? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think usually how I think about it is more like non-clinical and clinical AI. So, you mentioned Skin Analytics, that more the clinical side, diagnostics, and then you have the non-clinical side, which is everything around admin. And I think most likely, at least in the next couple of years, the non-clinical side will be the one that will probably go the fastest and get adopted fastest. And at the beginning, it will be probably more of a co-pilot setup. So augmenting humans, and then, they will be able to prove that it's actually a safe technology to use. They will make an ROI case, and slowly it will become more of, just the AI replacing that human work, and, in the end, freeing up time for these people to take care of something else. So that's a bit how I think about it. yeah, it's more around non-clinical, clinical. I think it starts as a co-pilot assisting the human, and then with time it will be able to take on more responsibility.
And I'd like to sort of follow on from that, what Daria's saying is that it makes a great deal of sense to start with the sort of non-clinical and administrative tasks, because when it comes down to working as a doctor, the bit that I wanted to be able to do as a doctor, a nurse as a nurse, is do that doctoring thing, be with patients, do that part. I didn't want to do the administrative stuff. It was that stopped me doing the work that I need to and burn it out. So that makes sense for not just because the barriers to getting to sufficient quality and safety are higher maybe for that clinical practice, and we should still be addressing how we can augment that. But those things that could otherwise be done by a machine should be done by a machine to free me up. The general principle that I try to take with technology is that technology shouldn't come between people. And I say this as the fact that we're speaking over the line here, but where possible, we have to connect that. And so the most successful technologies, and I think Ambient Scribe's one of the great success points, is that it allows people to feel more connected again on top of everything else. That's the thing that doctors always tell me when they talk about it. They talk about X, Y, and Z, but they always start with saying it just feels nicer. I am looking at people. I am talking to them. So that general principle, you do the administrative stuff, free up the time. We've trained people to do that part, and then we ask them to do things that could otherwise be done elsewhere.
We have a comment from Yaf Pramadasan. He's saying, how do we get AI as a medical device regulated at pace? It's a slow process, as it is for software as medical device. And yeah, he's saying he sees regulatory blockers slowing down adoption. Yeah, I mean, so bringing it back to the question, it's 10 years will we be seeing AI or human? 10 years is not super long in the NHS and with kind of the regulatory things on the side. But I feel like people are getting better. I mean, Keith, you can probably speak to this because you consult a lot of companies, but I feel like the more companies I work with, and definitely what I see in Tortus, is that we get better and better at doing the medical device paperwork and knowing what is needed and what is required. I feel like a lot of startups start without thinking of this, and they don't have the evidence generation, they don't have the framework and the data to actually back up the regulation. I do think sometimes regulation can be a bit of a blocker, but I don't think it should stop innovation. Keith, want to?
I would agree. I mean, the first thing to say is that you don't see regulation as some kind of barrier or hurdle or anything like that. If anything, getting it right is your greatest ally in this case, because regulation is simply about giving the evidence to show that what you say you're going to do does it. That's it. And making sure that it's safe to boot within there. So who would want to build anything that wasn't that? I think the thing that people get upset about is that they either think it's going to be much easier or it's unclear, and then they have to sort of stop and step back and so on. So I mean, that's the first thing, is making sure that it's not your enemy in this case. Thinking at the earliest opportunity means that you're less likely to build up that kind of governance debt, that regulatory debt that will derail you down the line. That's part one. The second part, just to keep it brief as well, is that but we are in a period right now where the technology has definitely outpaced our ability to understand how to do this well. So I think it's really important that the regulatory bodies, be there in the UK, EU, or wherever else in the world, try and come to some kind of decision and make it clear and crisp, and then stick to this as well, because that's the next thing, is that a shifting goalpost or an unclear goalpost is worse than actually having a hard goalpost that doesn't move. So there's something about clarity. Now, that's easier said than done with the moving target of artificial intelligence, but I still think that we should be able to do this. I personally think this starts with actually seriously funding the regulators to be able to do this work. They can't do it just on a wing and a prayer. And that has to be solved, I think, with clarity, with responsiveness, and people being able to engage at an early stage. That kind of bottleneck will go, at least get better, maybe.
Yeah, I very much have to second that. in terms of, it feels like the decision making around the regulation is the challenge. But actually, when it comes to implementing the actual technology from the lens of organizations, you really want to know that has been safely governed and there are clear guardrails in place around that technology. It's not sort of innovate at all costs and implement. These are ultimately patients we are talking about. So it doesn't feel like the regulation is the challenge. It's what the process is behind that. So yeah, very much second what Keith was saying.
Yeah, also I wanted to make a point on the processes side. So definitely I think regulation has its place in healthcare, but there is a role that private companies can also play in that. So we're seeing, companies that are building software to help medical devices, to keep track of all the documentation that they need to stay compliant. We are even seeing companies who, are going as far as getting their own license to be a notified body that is much more efficient, is AI powered in the background, and is able to actually give these certifications. So there is a lot where, startups can also step up.
Perfect. And the next question is kind of parallel to what we were talking about in regulation. So the question is, will Europe fall behind, race ahead, or just keep up with the rest of the world in healthcare AI over the next 5 years? So there's a nice poll there for everyone to submit their votes. But there's this common saying, right? It's like the US innovates in AI and China imitates, and we've kind of seen that with DeepSeek and different AI models. And then Europe regulates. That's kind of the funny kind of saying that people are throwing around. And in some ways, there is some truth to it. Like you can see all the forefront companies like OpenAI, Anthropic, Grok 3 came out last night, and it's beating a lot of benchmarks. That's the LLM from Twitter, or X from Elon Musk. Maybe we start with Daria on this, because you probably work with different landscapes in different countries. How do you see AI in healthcare? Do you place a lot of emphasis on the country that this startup or company is operating in terms of investment? Is it a downside to be in Europe versus US, for example?
Yeah, I mean, I would say so far, and we've seen this in the headlines recently as well, I think Europe has fallen a bit behind the US, at least for now. I think it was also Macron who was saying this a few days ago. But I would say, it's just the start of AI. The race is far from being over, and I do think Europe will catch up. Not sure what to say about being ahead of the West, but I think it will catch up for sure. And we've seen the government stepping in and helping companies with that. Like there was 100 billion allocated towards AI in France, and there are similar budgets allocated around Europe. We've seen just, was it this morning, I think, or like a few days ago, that the EU announced that it's actually cutting down on a few of the AI regulations that they wanted to implement. So I think everyone sees that, and everyone is making a collective effort to make sure that Europe won't fall behind US, China, and some other countries. And I think that's also where we as investors can step in and back these companies that are actually trying to address this problem, that are innovating in AI and pushing forward this innovation. So I would say everyone is seeing that, everyone is working on it, and I am hopeful that we won't fall behind. There's so much talent in Europe as well.
Yeah, I can say from the poll, I think the audience here is quite pessimistic. So only 4% said Europe would race ahead.
So,
why don't we flip the question though? How does Europe not fall behind? And how?
No. So yeah, okay. I'll try and flip it. Okay, I think Europe will fall behind. Okay, but like Daria says, this is a longer game than people think. I think first of all, benchmarks are not outcomes. That is the first thing to say. It doesn't matter how great it is at doing multiple choice or whatever task they have in front of it. That's impressive. What matters to me, and I think matters to people who work in healthcare, is what difference does it make to the patient in front of me or the people delivering the care as well. And there's a long way between those two things. Then you look about the fact that it's sort of pace of development. And I think I'm going to definitively say I think Europe will fall behind in that race. But remember, people are racing at pace on an uncertain road. And ahead of us is particularly some prizes, maybe, but there are also some really, really unpleasant things as well, potentially. The faster you run, the sooner you hit those things. And that is what I think is maybe potential here. I know with you're at Tortus, Dom's at Tortus. There's something about, don't go so fast, we're in a hurry. And in this case, I can very clearly see a situation where some territories make it much easier, move much faster, and deliver something truly unpleasant for their population, and then get mired down in the consequences of this, and ultimately will be much slower as a result. So I don't see moving slower in this case as being, this isn't a zero-sum game on this one. I think that there needs to be some change. I think you don't want to fall too far behind, but we want to be faster at delivering outcomes and slower at hurting people. I think that's maybe the way to do it.
The thing that scares me, Keith, is that for many clinicians, they're only using AI for the first time in the clinical work. And if we rush, you end up risking that they say, oh, this product is unsafe or it's terrible. You actually put them off AI and you put them off the product. And in the future, these might be decision makers, in the NHS or wider. So, yeah, I do think there is something in doing it as fast as you can whilst being safe and methodical about it. Like if you rush it, there is the risk that it's a race to the bottom then, right? You bring everyone else down and you bring the general sphere of AI down. Because of
multiple dimensions. We can be faster at doing it safely.
Exactly.
Who's going to be the first to deliver a really great way of getting these things out safely that make a difference, as opposed to one that can solve some mathematics Olympiad?
Exactly. Angeli, do you have anything to add to this?
Yeah, I mean, I think the real opportunity for Europe is positioning itself as a responsible AI innovator, and the sort of PR around the fact that we are still innovating at speed, but celebrating our wins around where sort of innovating responsibly, where we win in that. So that's a real opportunity in terms of how you position it, how the EU positions itself. But no doubt, other markets are certainly innovating at much faster speeds right now.
And just quickly on the benchmark thing, Keith, like every time a new AI model comes out, everyone talks about, oh, it's beat this benchmark, beat that benchmark. Large language models are amazing at answering multiple choice questions nowadays. So in medical exams,
you might as well just discard it. Yeah. It solved multiple choice questions. What's next?
But this is nothing like the real world. Working as a doctor, you can see it, right? Doctors that pass exams easily and do very well are not necessarily the best doctors. And this is the same in AI. Yeah. The next question is so this is more of a blue sky one, but what's your dream state use case for healthcare AI? Is there one use case that really speaks to you that you think, wow, this is really useful, this is really elegant? Maybe I can start. Well, in my head, this question, there's not one use case. Like what I see is probably like a string of use cases. And that's similar to what we said in the first question, like will you see an AI or a clinician first? In some cases, there will be a string of bespoke solutions that would be very useful. So from triaging a patient to screening them, to then you going to see a clinician and they're using an AI scribe, which also helps prompt them. So like one thing we're trying to do in Tortus is if there's, you can bring up guidelines. So if a patient has a seizure and the model can detect that, you can bring up the driving guidelines. This is something that's routinely not done very well. Someone has a seizure, they shouldn't be driving for 6 to 12 months. So the model can softly bring up guidelines and prompt the clinician to help them just do a more universal, better quality consultation as well. And then obviously there's the whole like AI imaging side and diagnostics. So I like in my dream world, there's like this entire workflow of different AI bespoke solutions. But maybe I cheated a bit. Maybe we start with Daria. What's your best use case that you've invested in even?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I'm not sure if it's necessarily about one use case, but I definitely want to see a world where, wherever I am, no matter the time, I can just access healthcare at that point with no reason, no waiting time. And I think behind, maybe I don't even need to go there, right? Because, it was already an algorithm that was able to tell me months in advance or years in advance what to do in order to avoid getting sick, right? And I think on the back of that, there is a chain of AIs, as you said, that are innovating on the front end side, on the back office side, and are enabling clinicians and patients to get there. So I think it's more about, an ideal worldview that I have in mind, which is access to healthcare at whatever time and wherever I am. And then on the back of that, there is a lot that needs to be happen and tasks to get in a row to get there.
Yeah.
I cheated a bit.
Yeah. Keith, do you have any good use cases?
Yeah, well, I'll maybe sort of talk about 2 use cases. So I'll speak as a doctor and then I'll speak more generally. So as a doctor, so I graduated in 1996, and at that point there was a lot of schlepping around hospitals. Maybe it's still like that in hospitals, with the consultant ward round. The consultant would walk in and they'd have this big team floating around with them. And, as the student to the JHO, the junior doctor to the SHO to the registrar, all the information was then crunched and then provided that one question to the consultant, who would walk in and say something lovely and wise. And then what would happen is the actions would then cascade back out the way. So the dream state for me is to be operating as a doctor with that provided by AI. I'd like to have all the information provided to me to present the decisions that I have to make, to work with the person to weigh it, and then pass it back out the way. That's the kind of dream use case, but there's little bits beforehand. I see someone mentioned here about the loss of skill. Maybe come back to that in a moment, because there is a risk there. But if I'm sort of thinking about quality delivery of care, that would be it. Now, if I'm thinking about from the patient use case, I think the dream situation is to have a technology which means I never have to see the healthcare system at all. I never have to see a doctor, nurse, nothing. I think that's maybe an ultimate destination. I'll come back to a bit more detail on that. And I think it's a long way to go. And I don't think, maybe we'll never get to that point. But as a person, I don't want to be involved with healthcare at any time. So anything that gets me closer to that, but does let me get it when I do need it, is the dream case there. So that's very kind of aspirational. But there are steps along the way, I think, that get us closer.
Yeah, I think I'm going to take it a step further. Okay, so if we look at how we deliver care right now, we're all probably frustrated by how disease-centric our care model is. And medicine's quite a young profession, right? Subject. But ultimately, it would be great, or my vision for AI is that it joins me as an ally to transform the way we deliver care. So we're far less reactive and far more proactive, and have more of a preventative healthcare model. And so we can actually transform and reimagine the way we deliver care. AI is already doing that in the diagnostics field and allowing us to pick up these patients earlier, improving the way we deliver care when it comes to curative therapies. So yeah, that's my sort of broader vision for AI, that we kind of take medicine in general to the next level, to medicine 3.0, and completely reimagine how we deliver care.
I do think there is something to be said about moving more to prevention, right? Like at the moment when I'm working in the NHS, I see patients, but there's always this time pressure that, everyone's asking, when do you think you can discharge them? The second they step in, we're already thinking, how do we get them out of the hospital? And we don't always sort all the issues out to prevent them from coming back in. And what you do see is people they get discharged, but then they come back shortly after because their initial problem or the problem on the side was not fully managed. Keith, do you want to?
I was going to say, the only way we're going to manage that is if we don't forget about social care.
Exactly. Yeah, that's often.
No matter how perfect healthcare is, if there's nowhere for them to go to.
And there is a question in the chat around reducing the level of health anxiety in our population. And I just wanted to make a point here. I mean, one is about education, and then second, now if I go and Google, my symptoms, the conclusion will be that I have like this horrible disease. So if, there will be an alternative, an AI that, I could actually go and speak with, and it will give me educated advice, then I think that will definitely help on that side, right?
We're still not there because, because these large language models are trained on that exact data. Like what I've realized is when I play with these large language models, they have a high propensity to suggest cancer or a worrying diagnosis, even when it's probably just a common variant of a very common ailment or disease.
Yeah, and that's why we need models specialized for healthcare, right? ChatGPT, obviously, it's not enough. It has the same biases, right?
Keith?
It's going to be. I think health anxiety is a very interesting one. I've suffered from it myself before, and I've certainly treated patients with health anxiety. It's very common. I think everyone's got it to some degree at some point. Sometimes it crosses that disease line, and we start calling it that. But so in part, how does AI help us deal with health anxiety? By freeing up humans, so humans can help the people having the anxiety. I think there's a really important role. When patients would come to me, they'd have all this information. I wouldn't really add any more information. All I would be saying is like, yeah, my experience, this really isn't something to worry about. I've seen plenty of this before, and I'm sure you're going to be okay, kind of thing. And sometimes I was right with that. But that's kind of what I initially think is maybe a very, very human thing. The interesting question is, I've certainly seen a lot of work done with AI on doing things like disabusing people of conspiracy theory thoughts and everything like that. I haven't seen so much done about how a chatbot could help treat health anxiety. I mean, that might be an interesting thing to look at. I'm not saying that's the solution, but there's maybe something in there too, over and above just providing, like, some people who have a problem will have cancer, and the AI will correctly tell them that, but is the AI the one to tell them this, and so on. So it's a complex area, but AI maybe has some role in freeing up the human time to deal with that, but also potentially even directly counseling folks.
Yeah, and to add to that, I think my experience of having seen health anxieties, it's compounded by the frustration of access to care. So when you remove some of that and you make access to the clinician or perhaps the tech solution more accessible, you fundamentally perhaps reduce some of that anxiety.
Yeah, and I think I have a lot of friends, and actually myself included, who, at times they've been feeling down or lonely. I mean, this is going slightly tangential, but they ended up speaking to ChatGPT or Claude. And actually, everyone I speak to who has done that in those circumstances has actually been very positive. Everyone has actually said, okay, this is actually giving me quite a balanced reply, and it's actually helping in reducing my anxiety about XYZ topic. I don't know, I just thought that was quite interesting. And there are studies to suggest large language models do have sometimes maybe more empathy than a doctor on one of the studies. I mean, it's a bit flawed study, but it's quite interesting.
They do a very good job of doing a prediction of what an empathic response will be.
Yes.
But that's maybe a technical distinction, because the person still felt that they were being cared for. So who cares in some regards about this? It is a very interesting one. I think the other thing is that with iterations of ChatGPT, you might have seen they've just pushed another release out. And ChatGPT, when you use it, you can opt in to have a memory of what you've had conversations with. You can opt out of it as well, and it keeps a sort of record, not just the conversations, but like a sort of summary of it. So it builds up a picture of who you are for purely product purposes, of course, to try and help you be engaged with it. But over the weekend, in a group that I'm in, they were talking about, well, have you tried asking it this particular prompt? The prompt was along the lines of, tell me something that I don't know about myself, even if it's difficult to hear. And so we all tried that, and I tried it too. And I have to say, it was really quite powerful stuff and interesting, and delivered in a way that I knew it wasn't thinking or feeling or anything. So as an aid for reflection, it's quite good. The other thing to say is that the evidence suggests that people are more willing to say certain things to a machine than a human as well. And so when it comes to health anxiety, which for some people is a shameful thing, maybe less shameful to have that conversation with an AI than a person as well. So that, you know, it's not all or nothing. There's interesting little side steps you can take.
Yeah, there's a comment by Taha Khan. She's saying that increasing access feeds into health anxiety. Counseling and psychological training is how to really deal with health anxiety, and I agree with that. I do think, you know, we're not saying this is a replacement for professional counseling, but as you know, the counseling waiting list in the NHS is over a year at the moment in some areas, and I certainly have had friends and colleagues who were struggling, and, you know, waiting 1 year just feels very unfair, and you know, they need care a bit more urgently. So yeah, I don't know how AI fits in. Could there be a bridging therapy before you see a therapist?
Yeah. Or the other, or I was just going to briefly say the other thing as well is that is it possible to use AI to raise a kind of lay level of competent counselor to one of a slightly higher expertise as well? I mean, this is the other thing. This is, you know, the natural consequences, like a person caring for themselves, but along the way you have a highly skilled person, you have a unskilled person in that one area, and what AI appears to be doing is kind of raising the floor on this. So that means that we may have very few trained psychologists. We have a lot more people that may be very capable of delivering something valuable with some assistance. That's maybe somewhere that AI can come in. That's challenging to us as professionals, but that's definitely possible.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Yeah, no, just a quick remark, and maybe AI can also be used to plug in that gap a bit. And I think different things work for different people, but there are some that are working on building AI therapies. Maybe the technology is not there yet, and there will be a lot of skeptics. But I think for some people and for some use cases, that will work. So yeah.
I'm just reticent of time because I do want to open it up to a Q&A session. So let's just go to the last question. What will be possible in 10 years' time that isn't possible today? And maybe I can just quickly speak to this. Like, when I first got into the AI field, natural language processing, this was before large language models became a thing, right? So there were many things that we thought weren't possible, but with the advent of the large language model, it suddenly is possible. So, you know, extracting information from digital health records used to be, you know, very laborious task, and, you know, sentiment analysis, so like detecting whether a patient's concerned, angry, or whatever, it's quite a hard thing to train a model to do accurately. But with things like large language models, a lot of that has become possible. And initially there was skepticism, right? Large language models can't reason, but now in 2025 and beyond, you can see there's more and more reasoning models. And one thing I always think of in Tortus and in general is, like, do we innovate for the AI models that we have currently, or do we innovate expecting and assuming that there will be improvements in the model? And this is something that's very hard. Like, sometimes I embark on a research project, which by the time I'm finishing, a new model or a new change has come out, which essentially renders my research partially useless or like not as exciting. Maybe we start with Ikanjali and then we can move on.
Yeah, I think in the future, AI being on the journey with us in medical research is really exciting to me. What can we discover about treating patients, about managing health, that we haven't discovered yet with the assistance of AI? And in 10 years' time, I think that will be fully embedded within our research community. And I expect it fully embedded in our organizations in the way that we deliver care as well. So it's not going to be what AI, it's going to be how AI. So how are we refining the products, the models to actually best serve the actual organization that we're in, using that to predictively look at the population that is coming in, that is not coming in, and how we can use that from the lens of actually the NHS as an organization, the specific trust that you're looking at, and then the patient population as well.
Daria?
Yeah, I can go next. I think for me, one of the main challenges with AI is safety, right? I think at the moment, you know, it's a black box, like, you know, the input, you know, the output, but you don't know what happens in between and how we got to that conclusion. I think that will improve over time. I see already people working on understanding exactly what's going on in that black box and explaining how the AI reached a certain conclusion. So I think that will happen over the next couple of years, and that will massively increase adoption and the trust that we have in AI. It will enable us to control, much better how we get to that output. So I'm quite hopeful on that end.
I think interpretability and explainability is super important, right? I do think as a clinician, seeing my colleagues, that is one of the biggest barriers. You can see this in the polls, right? Like the doctors that don't engage with AI are often worried about clinical safety and not being able to tell why a model made a certain decision. And you're right, Daria, there's a lot of research from the big companies like Anthropic trying to distill they could actually find different neurons in the large language model that account for certain things they say. That's called mechanistic interpretability, and that's really interesting. And what I've been working on as well as a doctor in Tortus as the clinical lead, I want the AI scribe to be safe, right? And we talk about hallucinations a lot. Large language models do hallucinate. The rate of hallucinations actually getting less and less of each model iteration. But ironically, that makes it more dangerous because it's a rarer event. You could argue that perhaps the human behavior may or may not be checking as closely. If you know something's prone to error, you're probably going to check it a bit more. And there's a lot of human behavior in that. But one thing I'm working on is hallucination detection. And there's a lot of different ways you can try and detect inconsistencies in the data and hallucinations, which then you can flag up to the clinician to then review that certain sentence or the output. This is something that we'll be releasing quite soon, actually, and I'm super excited for. But yeah, let me pass it over to Keith. What are you excited for in the next kind of 10 years?
So 10 years from now is 2035. And I used to say that, what is happening in small scale now will be common in 5 years' time. And I think AI has slightly changed that. So it's difficult to be precise. So some things that I hope for. I think 10 years from now, patients will finally have access to all of their health data. I think we've done a terrible job of that so far, but importantly, they'll be able to make sense of it. I think those two things will convene. I think patients will be able to get their data and they'll be able to make sense of it. And the consequence of that is that the number of people that will be able to entirely self-manage their healthcare will increase. And I think if I'm going to be hyperbolic about it, we'll have the first people born who will never need to see anyone in the healthcare system as we define it now. So I think going to a Kanjali has said, those will be the first children of this post-healthcare world. We'll have some of them then. Exactly what that form is, I don't know. I can be easily falsified on all of this thing. But in 10 years' time, I think people having access to their data and being able to make sense of it without having to come to us for access or us for interpretation, I think that will be possible. And I think that will be a good thing. And I think it will also be good for the healthcare system as well, if I'm honest.
Amazing. Should we open it up to questions in the last 15 minutes? But Kanjali, sorry, I cut you off. But do you want to make a final comment, and then we can open it up to general questions?
My final comment would be that AI is what I said before. Really, it's not what AI we're going to be using; it's how we're going to be using it. So yeah, just second everything that both Daria and Keith have said on that.
Okay. Maybe I start with a question because I'm very interested in this. I work as a clinical lead and as a doctor, and sometimes I realize I am in a bit of a bubble. Like in my clinical lead job, I'm working with AI. I'm seeing AI every day. And then sometimes when I'm at work, I realize that the NHS is not the fastest to adopt certain things. And, for example, I saw in the WhatsApp group this morning, the ward team was celebrating because they finally got a laptop in the ward office. But, so to turn it around, I just think, what do you think can be done to improve adoption and transformation in the NHS? I'm talking about what concrete actions can we actually take from the ground up to make this vision that we've discussed in this talk, how do we make it real? And maybe we start with Keith. What actionable points do we have for people in managerial positions, clinicians, etc., people innovating in this space?
Yeah, so it ultimately comes into learning about it, and the only way to learn about it is to use it. So the concrete action is to find a safe way for everyone to have access to AI and use it. That's it at its simplest. Now there's detail within that. You don't want them just tearing away with ChatGPT on patient records. I'm a big proponent of safe, playful experimentation. It's something that Ethan Mollick talks about a lot. And everything that I know about AI has been learned really through playing with it and working out what it can and can't do, because what people are telling you it can and can't do is most often wrong, and almost certainly wrong for you. The only way to really find out is to use it yourself, because then you understand actually what it does do and doesn't do. It's not a human, it's not thinking, it's doing something incredibly useful. So I think a concrete step would be to, within whatever organization you are, find out a safe way for your staff to use this technology. You can make sure they don't use it in a clinical setting in any way. Some people will anyhow, right? I mean, they're already doing it. 1 in 5 GPs, according to a recent survey, are already using a product which has explicit terms and conditions not to use it for clinical purposes, So it's, the cat's already out the bag. So what can you do? Minimize the risk, find a way to do this, allow people to use it. And some people will and some people won't. But those people that do will learn a great deal about it, understand how it might be used, and actually be able to cascade that knowledge to others as well. So I think the one thing that you could do is address that.
Yeah, so education and play, right? I loved your comment on LinkedIn the other day about a Royal College of Digital Health.
Yeah. On my mind as well, yeah.
And to follow on from what Keith said, I think recognizing that AI does require an intensive, laborious change management process. Just because we are excited about AI doesn't mean our physicians, clinicians, or even the end user is that excited about AI, right? So that requires a rigorous change management journey that often the developer is very much involved in, because it requires the iterative development and the code development on the side of the developer with the organization. So really, again, it's how we're implementing the AI, how we are translating that to our users, to our physicians. And we've seen that with EHRs, ambient scribes right now, even though it seems obvious that you would want to use it, right? It's going to, you can look at the patient, you could do this, but actually there is still resistance, and that's unexpected sometimes. So it's still going to require intensive change management.
So what does that look like practically? Sorry, Daria will get to you. But what does that look like? Does it involve like having champions on the?
Absolutely. I think identifying who your key stakeholders are, who are going to join you in the enthusiasm in this process, and they're going to bring everyone along with them. So you want to get those key influencers first. You want to have a real strategy, depending on the size of the organization, around how you're going to target those digitally naive, digitally resistant, and often you're going to be enlisting those stakeholders to come on that journey with you, and also listening, right? So there might be, so with scribes, does that actually add more work when it comes to the review process for the physician? And if it does, there might need to be some customization for that physician, for that specialty, for that arena. So like that might look different in the ER versus the urgent care center versus the outpatient department. So actually, which department are you going to target first? Because we want that enthusiasm to become infectious across the organization. So I think those are some like practical steps around that.
Thank you, Daria.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. I think we need to just create a platform where engineers can talk with clinicians and they hear each other. And, I think from a clinician perspective, it's quite hard to get excited about something that maybe you are not familiar with, you don't understand, maybe you don't even know that all of this innovation actually exists, right? And then what I'm seeing on the startup and engineer side is that a lot of the times people are working on stuff that, maybe it's not as impactful in the clinic as they think it will be. So, just creating this environment and platform where the two worlds can talk to each other would be super helpful, because I think I'm seeing this from an investor perspective. We tend to stay in our bubble as well, as clinicians tend to stay in their bubble. So actually events like this are super helpful also for me, to hear what clinicians are saying and what they want. And then, I can also share more about what I'm seeing in my world. So we need to do a better job at merging the two.
Yeah, so that's communication and engagement is what I'm hearing. Andrew Costello-Cortez has a question here. Do you think that with an average reading age of 11 years old in the population, will the population be able to embrace all the possibilities that you describe? The NHS will also require education and people of Andrew's age are late adopters/users. Yeah, so the question is about education. I do think, like, I do believe that in medical school we should be educating med students about digital health and AI at an early stage. You know, we do this with clinical trials, we do this with drugs, we do this with evidence-based medicine. I don't see why there can't be a module that is focusing on digital health and educating clinicians, which can then disseminate that education to their patients. But why don't I pose it to, I don't know, if who wants to answer this one?
I posted a couple of things back to Andrew in the chat, but I'll sort of reiterate them just here as well. You know, that point about various, varying levels of sort of digital literacy or literacy or engagement with education, and how do we make sure that some people don't get left behind in this one too. I think if we look back at generative AI in general, there are some features of AI that actually make it very, very good at helping to address that. Number one, just in terms of literal taking text and reducing, translating it to different languages, but also different cultural contexts and also reading ages and the like. So we have the ability to take the existing materials. If giving people reading material is the best way, we have a great way of doing that. But then, of course, the other thing that you can do with it is you don't have to stick in one particular modality. You can take text and turn it into audio. You can take audio and turn it into video. You can turn it into something that is interactive. You can create it in bite-sized chunks that go out on TikTok if that's what's needed. This is our opportunity to actually improve education by leaning into the form that people engage with and want to engage with. That is not practically possible by just throwing lots of people at it. So there is something in there as well. I still come back to the fact that ultimately what we need to be going towards is helping people discover how it's meaningful to them. And that goes to what Akanjali and Daria saying about co-production. I get most excited, it's ultimately about solving a problem. It's not about forcing a solution of them. And who knows the problem, the people at the front line. We have to involve them in building those solutions. And there is the opportunity for them to build their own solutions as well. And then I come back to the other point about patients not needing to see anyone ever. But there are steps along the way that help improve how we deliver care.
Yeah, thank you, Keith. We have a few more questions. Maybe you can put your hand up virtually if you want to answer this one. But Tana Khan makes a really good question. In the current climate, we have demonstrable evidence of spreading clinician and doctor unemployment/underemployment. Competition ratios now are like sky high for specialties. How will AI impact this? What can we do to improve our job security from a doctor/clinician point of view? Would any of you like to answer this one? Unemployment and AI.
I can start with that one. I think upskilling ourselves, you mentioned it already, Josh, around having digital health modules within medical school. Com skills wasn't taught until that was integrated into the modules. And now I think we need to address upfront that we actually need to be upskilling our medical school students and clinicians on the ground right now around the infrastructure that exists and is likely to develop over the next few years.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I'll come in on this. I think, the truth is, it is correct that there is an element of worry about this because things are going to change. I think, to turn around and say that we have nothing to worry about is not right. But we only have to worry if we think that how we do things now is the only way of doing it. There's going to be an element of change in there. There are already technologies so skin analytics, let's say, skin analytics and their technology, that class 3 regulated device that is highly accurate at determining whether a lesion is not cancer, is already vastly better than me at doing that task, vastly better. If I define myself purely by the fact that I could determine skin lesions or something, then the emergence of that technology alone would be very, very threatening. I totally understand that. And we're going to see more and more point solutions. So the natural destination is, well, at what point, what's left? What's left when all these things that I do are done better by machines if it's done by a machine? But I just have to remind everyone that doctors and medicine existed long before medical science. We did something extremely valuable and useful. I'm not suggesting we're going back to some kind of dark age here, but we have forgotten as much about how to care for people as we've lent into delivering technical solutions. There is an opportunity for us to look at different ways of doing things and adopting that space again. I think for those people who are very, very purely technically defined, this can be a very threatening time. But I suggest that this is happening anyway. And it's really important to understand this, because within wherever you are, a much better way of working will emerge. But that has to be with engagement. So I don't know if that's scary or not scary, but I certainly think that's a fact.
Yeah. And you know, I read the other day that from the Health Foundation that the waiting list in the NHS is 1.5 million or something in that order. So there's plenty of work to be done. I don't think AI is anywhere near going to get rid of that need for clinicians. Should we just tackle the final question in the interest of time? Asim Sadana said, you make a great point about large language models, keep evolving / getting more accurate, increase reasoning. How do we separate what should remain in the LLM foundation layer versus what you'd build as specialist knowledge at the application layer? Is there a good framework or generic approach? So maybe I can answer this one. So what you can see with things like OpenAI, Anthropic, all the new large language models coming out is they're getting better and better, but they're almost all converging. You know, at a certain point, it probably won't matter what foundation model you use. You know, DeepSeek being a great example, right? This is the Chinese model. It's at the O1 kind of reasoning level, so like the best OpenAI model, with some changes. O3 is coming out soon. But what I see is you should see foundation models as almost like an operating system. So you know how we use Windows and MacBook and Linux. It's almost like the base layer. And yeah, you do sprinkle your own specialist knowledge on top. And the best application is the one that does the best on your evaluations. Like, I really believe like there's not enough research in the evaluations and safeguarding. And if we crack that and we find a good way to evaluate models, then it doesn't really matter what foundation layer you use, right? The best model is the best one for this application, for this evaluation metric, which is representative of real life. And you also have a lot of surveillance. So when you do run it in real life, you see whether it's performing in the real world. Final remarks, Daria, and then Keith, and then Nikanjali, and then we can wrap it up.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to make a point. I think one way to build defensibility, right, is the data that you have access. So, you know, you have the large foundation models, but those people maybe don't have access to, I don't know, this patient cohort and this data that you have to, I don't know, hospital and a partnership. So, you know, specialized model do come into play then. And if you have access to a specific data set that is unique for this application, then it will likely perform better than a foundation model. And that's where we're seeing a lot of companies, you know, trying to innovate and add defensibility and build on top of the foundation models that everyone has access to.
Kanjali, and then.
Yeah, I mean, the title of this was The Future of AI in the NHS. And I'd like to just reiterate the fact that the future is bright in the NHS and outside of the NHS. It's going to be the way we work with AI, how we actually keep patients at the center, the problem at the center, and actually look at the problems that we're addressing for the organization, for the NHS, and wider. That's really going to be at the core.
Thank you. And Keith, final remarks?
Yeah, I need this. Always so many things to say, but I'll just come in on that. I say, ultimately, it comes down to AI and what it can do for the NHS. The UK has made a very fortunate decision in how it chose the NHS, and in particular about what that means for the population that we serve and the principles behind it. One of the happy consequences of this is that we have an enormous amount of data. Now, that is not in great shape, it is not interconnected, but we do have as a country made decisions about data, not only in the NHS, but in other public services over many decades about how we collect this data. And these data were collected to care for patients, for care for people. If you want to build AI to care for people, there is nothing better than that because of these decisions that we've made. And that is actually a really hopeful thing. But it does require us to think carefully and deeply about how we use this and what we use it for. And if we're driven for doing it the right reasons, again, going back to why did we set up the NHS? How do we do it? What are we trying to do? AI is just a tool. It's a very, very fancy tool. Does a lot of different things, but it's just a tool. So we have to think, what problems do we want to solve? And how do we want to do it in a way that's safe, effective, equitable, and sustainable? We didn't go into the sustainability part, but the sustainable part, because I think that the way we're doing it is the right way. It just needs a wee bit of help.
Thank you, Keith. Yeah, I mean, that's a better closing remark than I can make. So I think thank you everyone for attending, and a big thank you to our speakers, Daria, Ekanjali, and Keith. It's been amazing. And yeah, thanks for joining the last episode of the AI Tortus Academy. I hope it was helpful. Feel free to message or email me or the speakers if you have any further questions or want to just chat offline. I'm always happy to. Yeah, thank you very much.
Great to speak to you. Thanks, Daria and Ekanjali, and thanks for hosting, Josh.
Thank
and
you.
get well soon, Dom. Get well soon, Dom.
Yeah.
Thanks for having us. Thanks everyone for joining, and get well soon, Dom. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.